The events of the last few weeks mark a fundamental, permanent and irreversible shift in where power over the news narrative resides. I remember vividly the first time we sat across from a grooming gang survivor and heard her story. Dr. Ella Hill came on TRIGGERnometry in 2020, detailing not only the abuse she experienced at the hands of her perpetrator, but also the wall of disinterest from the police when she sought the help and support of the people whose job it was to protect young women like her. Hearing her story and the dignity with which she told it had a powerful impact on me, like no interview we've ever done. Even though our platform was small then, I still felt an overwhelming weight of responsibility to do something, anything. I cold called several newspapers to see if they would be interested in using our interview, completely free, as the basis for articles, other interviews, or anything else. I spoke to every journalist I could think of. I did what little I could. For a couple of weeks, I thought of nothing else. But then I gave up, because I was getting nowhere. Ironically, it was Ella herself who comforted me. When I told her I would do whatever I could, she knew I wouldn't get anywhere, because she and hundreds of other survivors like her hadn't either. This is not to say that the mainstream media did not cover the story. They did, and Andrew Norfolk of The Times was the man who brought the story to public attention. Documentaries, TV shows and other newspaper coverage have also helped raise awareness of this issue. But the level of prominence given to this story was shockingly insufficient. What happened, the gang rape of women and children on a mass scale, was so horrific that itself should have been cause for it to be covered every single day in exactly the way it's been covered over the last few weeks. Why? Because if the crimes themselves were not heinous enough, there is a further and equally sinister factor at play. These crimes were motivated not only by the sexual violence of the perpetrators, but also by their hatred of white people. As Ella explained, the victims were called white and white slaves. And all the authorities had to do was recognize that these are racially aggravated crimes, and the perpetrators are the actual racists. This never happened, of course. Instead, the victims were called shaggers by the authorities and dismissed due to a combination of incompetence, disinterest, and nervousness about race. In other words, at precisely the time that the world went insane over a supposed hate crime epidemic, to the point where people started being investigated by the police for hurty words, the police, social services, council officials, and health workers all turned a blind eye to the suffering of young women who were being targeted specifically because of their race. This should have been covered daily until pressure was brought to bear on the government of the day to take all necessary drastic action to rapidly investigate, prosecute, convict, and deport as many of the perpetrators and those complicit in their crimes as possible, and equally to offer full support and restitution to the victims. If you're struggling to picture what the coverage should have been like, let me paint you a picture. What would be our media's and government's reaction if hundreds of white men had targeted Muslim girls for gang rape, torture, and beatings? What would happen if it turned out that a father who came to rescue his daughter from the rapists was arrested by the police they called instead of the perpetrators? What would happen if we learned that there were tens of thousands of victims by the most conservative estimates? In a country that spent a full week on wall-to-wall coverage of a white woman asking a black woman where she was really from at a royal function. The media would have gone ballistic. Debates about the far right, Islamophobia and racism would have gone on for months. We would have had apology after apology, inquiry after inquiry, press conference after press conference. But none of that happened with grooming gangs. Until now. Yesterday, Yvette Cooper, the Labour Home Secretary, rode back on her party's position and announced a series of measures, including more local inquiries, after unrelenting pressure coming from the new media space. Elon Musk, using his massive audience on X, amplified calls for justice on this issue to such an extent that it became simply too big to ignore. And suddenly, the people who'd been writing and talking about this the entire time in obscurity are finally being heard. Even as someone who's skeptical about the track record of inquiries, especially ones which the government of the day reluctantly accedes to, I can't see how this is not a good thing. The power of the establishment to keep things quiet is waning. The voices of individual people are getting louder. That is as it should be. And perhaps, finally, survivors like Ella stand a chance of getting real justice, while the perpetrators and those who let them get away with their crimes might yet feel the much overdue full force of the law.